Hello, everyone, and welcome into the Go 24/7 podcast. My name is Bryce Koon alongside Glen West. We appreciate if you're watching over on YouTube or if you're listening on the many different platforms that you can be hearing this on Spotify, Apple, iHeartRadio, and all of those in totality. Glen West and Bryce Koon here as we get ready to rock and roll, Glenn, with another recruiting update. Yes, it's July. Yes, things are a tad bit quieter. You and I were just talking that we are going to start ramping up kind of more of the team coverage here. SEC Media Days on the horizon, and then it's going to be fall camp, and then we'll be talking USC, LSU for about a month. It'll be a lot of fun. But until then, we do have kind of a recruiting recap, a rewind of sorts, as LSU cleaned up, one of the best words you could use, along the front seven late last week. Glenn, we had all the coverage over at Go 24/7, but did want to get your thoughts. I know you put out some pieces, late last weekend, but LSU bolsters a front seven that I said on, my immediate reaction little podcast. We took a look at the film. They needed this. They really have to start stacking some guys, whether it's on the interior defensive line, those edge rusher positions. The edge rusher position looks pretty good for the foreseeable future, in my opinion. But just kind of your thoughts on the job that Kevin Peoples, Bo Davis are starting to gain some momentum on the recruiting front in a class that about a month and a half ago had like one defensive commit and now starting to look a little bit more balanced.
Yeah, I mean, I'd echo those sentiments entirely in regards to the edge rusher position in particular. I mean, what they've done the last 2 weeks is bring in two top 10 guys in the country in LeJesse Harold and Damian Shanklin. So that's a good place to start if you're bringing in two top 10 edge rushers in the country, guys that are, top 100 players, top, 150 players, guys that, I think kind of profile well to the next level. I mean, they're both got some size, they both got agility and speed, and I think will certainly be future staples of this pass rush defense that LSU is hoping to kind of rebuild a little bit. I mean, like you look
Yeah.
at kind of the roster here right now, they have a couple of young guys, Deshaun Womack, Gabriel Relaford are really exciting young players. Dylan Carpenter is a really exciting young player. But they also have some veterans here that, could very well be moving out over the next couple of years, and Savion Jones and Paris Shand and Braden Swinson and some of those older guys that have been a part of the program for the last several years. So, I think it was important for Kevin Peoples to get in here and really start recruiting that class heavily. I think really kind of when the tide started to turn on a guy like Shanklin in particular is when he was in here for the spring game back in April. I mean, just, he was around, Harlan Berry and Bryce Underwood and just really all those guys, Keelan Moses at the time, 2025 class, just all those commits were kind of assembled for that one weekend back in April. And, you also had a guy like Brandon Brown who was in there. Zion Williams, I'm pretty sure may have been in there for that spring game visit. I can't quite remember if he was, but those are kind of laying the foundation, for kind of the recruitments to come. And then you're able to get all those guys back on campus for official visits in June. So you really are able to kind of hammer home the importance and kind of make them feel known. And, obviously the two edge rushers were really highly touted guys, and flipping the Texas commit Brandon Brown I thought was a really important move for Bo Davis. Look, we've talked about it ad nauseum. Like you look at the future of that defensive tackle room, and it's there's really not a whole lot there. I mean, you've got a couple of young guys that you can maybe start to build up on, Dominic McKinley and Ahmad Bro, but this is really kind of building from scratch. And I think maybe that's something that Bo Davis kind of looks at and sees as a positive challenge for him over the next couple of years. And I think getting some guys from Texas and Brandon Brown and Zion Williams, guys he's familiar with, guys he's recruited for a little while now, is a good first step for him. And that doesn't mean that he's done. LSU still could use one or two more guys on that defensive line to really hammer this thing home and kind of get a good first class for both Peoples and Davis. But look, it's a good start. You saw the rankings bump up from number 10 to number 6 for a reason. And I think LSU will continue to make that steady climb if they're able to get some defensive guys here over the next several weeks as well. But yeah, definitely a great start for this defense, a great start for Bo Davis and Kevin Peoples. But now we'll see if they can you got to stay on them, and you got to make sure that they get to December and are signing those dotted lines. So you got to stay on those guys. We've seen it already with a couple of players, jumping ship, and it's just a new world we live in. So you got to stay on
Mhm.
top of it. But it's certainly a great start if this thing holds into December.
Yeah, and you kind of mentioned right there, this front seven, you start to take shape. You feel like as long as they stay committed, you've got kind of maybe the linebacker position set, both with Charles Ross and Keelan Moses. The edge rusher, you feel like you got that set. And then you talked about rebuilding that interior defensive line. I like what you said, because probably the pitch is too, hey, there's an opportunity here. And I like how Bo Davis immediately went to, and there maybe they shop around for maybe one more guy along that defensive front. And I think that's totally in the cards. But the two guys you have in the fold, like you said, one guy's from Texas. Bo Davis had a good relationship with Zion Williams, just being a guy that he had seen a lot. And then obviously having a guy like Brandon Brown, who had been committed to Texas from Melbourne, Florida, but committed essentially to Bo Davis. Over there, relationship stays intact. They move obviously to LSU, and the conversations continue. It kind of just feels like, okay, there's the safety net. And that's not a knock on what Brown and Williams can bring, but those are the two guys that, hey, you need to get those guys in. Now maybe you can go get a third, Glenn. You really start to see, okay, here's three guys. You add them to the two or three that we have that are, currently freshmen this year. And now, as you look at the 2026 class, which look, there's some dudes in that 2026 class, you really could start to see, okay, this defensive line, they might take some, it might be a little bit of a roller coaster just because they're so young, but the talent, the potential that Bo Davis has to work with is pretty going to be pretty intense.
Oh yeah, and you've already seen it kind of start to pay off in 2026 with a guy like Richard Anderson, who's committed to the
Mhm.
Tigers already, one of the first commits to pop in that class. And I think just looking at kind of what else is out there, maybe for 2025, I think Rashad Sterling is a name you hear a lot. The edge rusher out of Lutcher. He's also kind of maybe a tweener linebacker kind of type. Kalaj Cobbins kind of mold. You look at him as a potential option there that LSU could really pursue. I believe they just offered him recently. Is that correct? They just got in.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Mhm.
he's somebody that makes a lot of sense. I would imagine they still stay on. A guy like Corey Amos, who's committed to Ole Miss at this point. So yeah, there's a couple more options out there in the state that I think LSU could really round out this class really well with. But yeah, I think you also have to have one eye towards 2026, because when you look
Yeah.
at just the amount of sheer talent that's in the state on the defensive line for 2026, it's insane. I mean, you have the big names, you have your Jakeem Stewarts, your Lamar Browns of the world, your Richard Andersons, but Dylan Berryman is right up there. You also got Darius McKinley, who's a younger brother of Dominic McKinley, so that there's a nice little avenue there to maybe get some momentum on board. So like there's that's 4 or 5 names that I just rattled off right there that are all in state, and if you're able to land even just 3 or 4 of them, like you're sitting in a really nice spot of being able to replenish this defensive line over a couple year period here, where you do it mainly within in-state talent. And I think that
Mhm.
at the end of the day, that's what LSU really is. They really pride themselves on being able to recruit in the state and being able to get the best talent at every position in the state. They did that in the 2024 class. I believe they signed 9 or 10 of the top 11, 12 guys in the class for 2024. They're already well underway, obviously with Harlan Berry and Devin Harper and Keelan Moses and some of the guys they have on board for this class. Would like to get Jabori Antoine back on board. That would be a big one if they're able to kind of convince him to stay. There's still a long time left in that recruitment. So, but this is a huge deal when you look ahead and kind of the positions that LSU will need to be recruiting the best over the next couple of years. I think defensive line, I think secondary, with safeties that you got coming up the pike here in 2026 with Blaine Bradford and Aiden Hall
Mhm.
and a bunch of those really talented players, and then also receiver. They've got some big time receivers out there. Jabari Mack is obviously somebody in 2026 that comes right to mind. So in-state talent, while it might not always it usually goes LSU's way, and I think LSU is going to have to stay on top of all those guys. And I think when you look at the future of what could be for this defensive line, it's certainly an exciting thing to think about if these coaches are able to land a bunch of those guys.
4 out of the top 10 guys in state in 2026 per 24/7 are defensive linemen
Yeah,
inside the state of Louisiana. And then if you add Lamar Brown into the fold, which a lot of people think that if he wants to play defense, he could, that's 5 out of 10. So, I mean,
yeah,
Glenn, there's no excuse if you're sitting there in 2026, 2027, and you don't have a full cupboard of
yeah.
guys to kind of work with along the defensive line. But you hinted on it. And so we're going to go over here to it. The front seven, woohoo. Like everyone's pumping their fists. They're excited about it. Glenn, there's some worry. There's some worry about the defensive backfield just a little bit. Obviously, Jabari Antoine decommitted. He is getting ready to announce a commitment date or his commitment as well. Obviously, Miami feels like they have been the sole proprietor of going
They're the
against
trendy
LSU here.
guys. Miami's
Yeah,
the trendy pick right now.
they're the cool guy down there in South Beach. I mean,
Yeah,
why wouldn't you want to entertain it a little bit? I will say, Glenn, that Jabari Antoine's the mix. Jace Thomas is a guy who I do believe is going to get a bump here when 24/7, bumps this up. He, per other places, he was bumped up to a 4-star. He's going to be announcing on July the 13th. And obviously, I feel confident about where LSU stands. And I know the rest of our guys do too, heading into that decision. But when you look at this defensive backfield, we know they have bodies. We know that on the field product is going to be a very big determinant of how this season goes for LSU. When you look at this class, Glenn, it kind of feels like it's the final missing piece in the defense. Like I said earlier, front seven you're starting to build. The linebackers you feel like you're comfortable with. You now have 2 edge rushers. Now it's time for Corey Raymond to do what you brought him in to do and
yeah.
try to win some of these battles. And I know that fans have been a little bit frustrated here so far, but just kind of your thoughts on the defensive back needs and really kind of centers around Jabari Antoine, a guy like DJ Pickett as well, that feels almost like a must get to have that high profile commit to.
Yeah, it's all really good points, and I especially like the one you made there about this secondary needing to be good for this season. But I also think that you can kind of extend that into a lot of these high school prospects are going to be watching to see just what kind of improvements can be made under this new defensive staff, and that
Yeah.
certainly extends to Corey Raymond and Jake Olson in the secondary, coaching up those guys. So, I don't want to say it's an audition for LSU in that respect, but it's certainly you want to start to see some of that improvement and start of that that trend kind of go the other way because I was doing a little radio hit yesterday and the guy, one of the radio hosts, mentioned to me, we don't think it can get much worse. So, like, I think there's only really one way to go, and that's up. So, you really are hoping that the internal development LSU's had this season can really, embark, kind of, help LSU not only on the field this year, but in the recruiting aspect as well. And you mentioned, Pickett's a guy that I think, it's really going to come down to relationships, but I think that relationship with Corey Raymond is among the strongest that he has in terms of his recruitment. So that's where
Mm.
LSU really, I think, is going to have to hold its head on and really kind of, even if he doesn't choose LSU here on July 17th when he does commit, that's somebody you don't just give up on him. Like you
Yeah.
don't just move on from a player like that, especially when you've built such a great rapport and a great relationship with his family. The Patrick Peterson angle there was something that was really driven home this summer as well with Pickett. So we'll see kind of what happens there. They still got 8 or 9 days to really kind of work that recruitment and reach out via text and phone calls and that kind of thing. So we'll see kind of what happens there. It really does seem like Oregon is kind of the trendy pick right now for him as well, but LSU certainly will not be giving up on that aspect. And then Antoine commits on the 20th, so that's your your top targets in terms of cornerbacks. Coming off the board in a matter of 3 or 4 days. So
Mhm.
LSU will be very hard at work trying to get one or both of those guys back into the fold here for this class. You mentioned Jace Thomas. He commits on July the 13th. I think all the intel that we have is that he's probably going to lean towards LSU. I mean, we don't know for sure, but I think that's when you get an offer and you make a commitment date and kind of all that stuff is jumbled together really quickly. I think LSU has to like where they sit going into that recruitment on July the 13th, and then Another one that hasn't even been decided yet in terms of a commitment date is Aiden Anding,
Yep.
the Ruston cornerback who LSU just recently offered. Very new to football. I think he last year was his first year playing organized high school football. So, and he was one of the big time performers in their state championship win last December as well. He had a big punt return in that game and made a couple big plays too. So, he's somebody that to me, if I'm a cornerbacks coach, a secondary coach, a coach of any kind, uh, you look at development, you look at raw talent. That's kind of a player that I think anybody would love to get their hands on because I think he's only going to get better from here.
Hmm.
And he's already a pretty high 3-star prospect, and he's only played football for 1 year. So I think once they get more eyes on him, he's somebody that I could absolutely see developing very quickly and having a big impact on a college program. So, those are some of the names that we're hearing. At safety, CJ Jim Coyley is somebody that I think LSU fans should really be paying attention to. Anquan Fagans, it looks probably more like he's leaning Auburn after his official visit in late June. So, those are some of the names that we're hearing that could be, deciding here pretty soon. And, LSU's got a seat at the table for all of them. And I think,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, you kind of get your handful of guys initially here in this summer, and then you still work to get the rest of them on board by December. And I think if LSU's able to get a couple of these guys in now, I think it's a win. And then you kind of work your way to trying to get maybe one of those two to flip towards the December signing period.
And I just kind of tease this right here. You can go check out the interview with Aiden Anding. But when I asked him during his interview right after the offer, he had planned on committing, and everyone felt like Texas was a strong lean. He had a couple crystal ball predictions there. When LSU offered, verbatim, his words was, "It changes things." And
Mhm.
now me and my family are gonna have to reconsider. Which anytime you see some crystal ball predictions, you see some VIP intel leaning towards one way, and an offer from your favorite team, LSU in this case, comes into the fold, and the guy says he's got to reconsider now, typically a pretty good indicator that that offer means a lot. And so I like what you said there. And there's options. There's a seat at the table. And Glenn, it kind of takes us to kind of what's next. Obviously, a lot of fans are familiar with that are on Go 24/7. If you're not, make sure you join and kind of let you in on this. The big Bayou Splash event that's going to be at the end of July, and sometimes this event kind of gets buried a little bit in between us getting ready for fall camp and coming out of SEC media days and everything. But Glenn, this is going to be a big opportunity for a lot of the guys that are committed. There's no indicator, but I fully expect to be a full list of guys that are committed, that are going to be recruiting guys that are making this visit. Anding is a guy that told me he's planning on getting down here for that visit. Jace Thomas as well. So when you look at some of these names that are going to pop up at the Bayou Splash. We talk about what's next. There's a lot of decision dates coming up. I mean, Glenn, this recruiting event is kind of that last big hurrah before their senior seasons. It's a really big opportunity for guys to be able to kind of all get together in one place and the focus still be on recruiting. During the visits during the season, it's like the coaches are trying to get ready for a game.
Yeah, yeah.
It's good. It's good to see you, but this is kind of one of those last big events. Last year was a big one, obviously, but just kind of your thoughts on what's next. We talked about a couple decision dates and just the importance of that Bayou Splash event and what it could mean and how it could catapult this class, maybe to a top 5 ranking, to a top 3 ranking. I know a lot of people don't care necessarily about the rankings. Some people do, some people don't, but they need to stack talent, and the Bayou
Yeah.
Splash event's a place where you could do that.
Yeah, I mean, they did that last year. I think from the 2024 class, you look at kind of all the names that were in for that event. I think that was really kind of the start of, Gabriel Relaford and Dominic McKinley. I think both of those guys were, either committed elsewhere or really not feeling LSU all that much at that point in the recruitment. And then 6 months later, they're both,
Hmm.
part of the signing class. Like, I think that
Yeah.
if there's a couple players out there like that LSU can get in for the Bayou Splash event this year, that would be really important. I also think this is probably a really good opportunity to bring in all of your committed players and make sure that you're on solid ground with all those players. I mean, we've already seen, a couple of them, decommit. Maybe that would be a great opportunity to get a guy like Jabori Antoine in for a visit, even if he does commit elsewhere on the 20th. If they're able to get him in, for that event, then I think you can start to think, okay, well, LSU is still very much a factor in this thing, and they're going to continue to recruit him, and we'll see kind of what goes from there. But like I think this is going to be really important for Keelan Moses and for Harlan Berry and Bryce Underwood, all those guys that you kind of have as staples as part of your class, who have been committed for a while. As you kind of, I don't want to say you lose, kind of you shift attention away from those players because you always are still recruiting those players, but so you're not like actively recruiting that player towards your program. You're
Yeah,
doing a good job of just kind of making sure that they feel like they're a part of the class. And I think that's important for an event like this as well, is to make sure that those players are all feeling that kind of vibe as they head into their own senior seasons and prepare for their own years where maybe recruitment's not at the forefront of what they're thinking. So
true.
I do think that it's important for that. And then I think what you also saw last year was, it was a good precursor for this class, in terms of, getting the 2025 kids in. Last year was a really good opportunity. I believe they had Underwood. I can't remember if they had Underwood or not. They had a couple of really big 2025 guys in town last year for this event, and it translated into what has become a really strong class so far for LSU. And
Hmm.
I think if you're able to do that with the 2026 group, especially some of those in-state defensive linemen we've just talked about, with some of those defensive backs, with a couple of those receivers, I think you're in a really good spot in terms of kind of going into their junior seasons and what is going to be a really big year for all those players going into their 2026, kind of junior years. That's really important as well. So this is still an event that I think carries a lot of weight as you kind of move into the fall. Like you mentioned, it's kind of the last ditch effort to kind of get everybody on board, everybody on the same page in terms of recruiting before you kind of have to shift your focus to the 2024 season. So a lot of
Hmm.
these coaches will make that known to these players, like, hey, we're still going to recruit you hard, but we've also got a season to prepare for just as you do. So it's
Yeah.
a good last kind of opportunity, I think, to get all those people in the same building at the same time. And like you mentioned, I think it's a really good event for LSU to have every year.
Let's end it with this because I'd be remiss if we didn't bring this up. I know you've said this on the boards. You're not worried about Cortez Hankton in this wide receiver room, but you have to imagine too the Bayou Splash event is going to include two guys, or they're going to hope to include two guys, Khalid Lockett and Jamie French. Those
Yeah.
are two guys that you would love to get on campus. Everyone's eyes are on what Texas is doing. Kind of that first domino fell, last week when DeCorian Moore announced he's going to Oregon. Texas fans weren't too happy about it. So that Sarkisian and company are really going to focus and hone in on those two guys. LSU in a full-on battle with them too, Glenn. As we kind of wrap up, I mean, I know we've talked a lot of defense, but offensively, that's kind of the one spot where you're like, okay, you'd like to see some traction. You got your quarterback, you got your running back. Brad Davis is going to do what Brad Davis is going to do on the offensive line. Those two guys, I mean, I know there's some underrated guys that you could go after, but when you look at the cream of the crop there, French and Lockett are two guys that LSU's been in on, they've had on for visits, and that Bayou Splash event would be pivotal if they can get them to be there for that event other than going elsewhere, especially over there in Austin.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, really look at the receiver kind of outline for LSU right now, and it's drying up quick in terms of guys that are committing elsewhere, and kind of the players that are still out there on the board. Philip Wright is a player that commits here over the next, I think, several days. Maybe he commits on Wednesday. I can't remember exactly when he commits exactly, but he's somebody that's a local player, Destrehan wide receiver who LSU's been on for a while, and we'll continue to recruit, even if he doesn't decide to go LSU's way this go around. But yeah, I mean, look, the two big ones that are still out there for LSU to really kind of make an impact with are French and Lockett. And from all the intel that we have and all that stuff, it sounds like Texas is making a big play for both. We'll see if they're able to
Mhm.
land both. I think Sonny's posted it on our board a couple of times. Like, I think they Texas feels like it can land both, and look, LSU is going to be making that pitch like, yeah, you can go, team up with him or go to Texas and team up together, or you can be the number one guy for our class that's bringing in the number one quarterback, the number one running back, top offensive line class in the country, and was coming off of a Heisman Trophy winning season and 3 first-round picks being just put into the NFL draft. Like, I think, all that stuff can be made pretty clear to French and to Lockett, and I'm sure it already has been. But we'll see. I mean, like, you've got to be able to match, opportunity, early playing time, relationships with the staff, with the NIL thing. I mean, like, the
Yeah.
NIL deal is very much a part of all these recruitments now, and I know fans, that's an easy cop out, for us to talk about in terms of why LSU loses these kinds of players. But it's very much a real thing, and a lot of these programs right now are generating a lot of resources. And I'm not saying LSU's not.
Mhm.
Like, they're going to pay for a player that they really covet and really feel like can be game changers for their program. But there's a lot of competition out there as well, and there's a lot of
Yeah.
programs that have unlimited resources right now for those players. So it'll be interesting to see. I I think if you had a gun to my head right now, I'd pick both Lockett and French to probably wind up elsewhere. But that doesn't mean LSU is going to stop recruiting them. Just like LSU
Yeah.
is not going to stop recruiting players that are committed to their class and players that are committed elsewhere. That they feel like they still have a seat at the table with. So, that there's a lot of time to go between now and the signing period here in December, and we'll see kind of what falls LSU's way. But certainly this event, you would love to see, one or both of those guys to kind of, maybe come in with Underwood and Barry and kind of get those good feels back after kind of being a summer apart for the most part with all those prospects.
Yeah, you mentioned to the signing period, Glenn. Even now, even after they sign, it's
Yeah.
still not and it's still not set in stone.
Finishing
So
second is not the worst thing anymore because a
it's
lot of
really
these
not.
players are hopping in the portal 1 or 2 years later, and you can have that relationship still firmly intact. So
Yeah. With the rate that guys into the portal finishing second often can be better than finishing first. And that's a weird statement for a lot of people, but with the amount of guys that jump in, it'll be interesting to see. But hey, LSU recruiting, obviously with a big weekend last weekend. And it's going to be a lot of fun to see how these guys approach the Bayou Splash event and that list. And you can get all that information over at Go 24/7. A great time to get a subscription. Glenn, really quick, because I know we've been promoting it. Let the people know how they can get a great deal. Take advantage of it. We're recording this on Tuesday, but man, you got to take advantage of this deal if you want all the latest intel on your Tigers.
yeah, we've got another week of this deal, I believe, going through next Tuesday, July the 16th, I believe, is the last day. But yeah, you can sign up for $1 for a month, kind of give you a good trial run there. Or you can go 50% off for the entire year of your first year membership. So lots of great deals out there. That gives you access not only to our sites, but a lot of different your Paramount Pluses, your other sites that are out there for 24/7 sports. Like there's a lot that you can unlock with a 50% off subscription. So yeah, it's a good deal for all, and hope to see some of you guys out here soon.
Yep, going to be a lot of fun. Make sure you join the conversation and catch us later on in the week, or whether it's on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcast, as we get ready to preview SEC Media Days. Glenn will be on location down there in Dallas, and Glenn, enjoy the traffic. MLB All Star Game. You
Yeah.
know, yeah, it's going to be a lot of stuff going
Just
on, but
Dallas in general, Dallas on a
Dallas
regular day. Yeah, yeah,
gonna be
it's not
fun.
the
It's gonna
best.
be fun. But we'll catch you next time here on the Go 24/7 podcast.